Hello, pianists and teachers. If we haven't met before, my name is Jana Williamson, and welcome to my home piano studio in the suburbs of Chicago. This is the July 2022 edition of Ask Me Anything. I have 3 questions to answer today, and the first one would apply to anyone teaching music, particularly to pre-college students. How much or how often do you communicate with parents? Now, I'm answering this question as an independent music studio owner, in my own home. If you are working at a music school or a conservatory or a piano dealer or anything like that where you have someone else handling the billing and the scheduling, then your answers to this might be slightly different, but hopefully there's still something here that would benefit you. I think there's 2 main types of communication: studio-wide communication and then individual communication. So for studio-wide communication, I prefer to do that over email, and I would say that it's probably likely that my students' parents get one email about every month. Of course, there's going to be more communication at the beginning of the year when we're setting schedules, setting up payments, and doing studio policies for the year and everything, as well as at the end of the year when we're wrapping everything up and looking ahead to the next term of lessons. But I think it's on average about once a month in my studio. I do not do a newsletter or anything. I just communicate as is needed. Now, some parents are not very good with email, and I prefer to do email because I like for my emails to have enough detail in them, and I don't think that texting is a great way to communicate a lot of detailed information. Plus, I just don't want to clog up my phone. So I did this year for the first time use the Remind app, and I offered for any of my students who thought maybe email wasn't the best form of communication for them, that they could opt in to be on the Remind list. And Remind just sends a text when you use the app as the teacher. It just sends a text to everyone in the list. So for instance, when I sent out an email giving all the details about recital, what to wear, when to be there, where the location was, parking information, all that kind of thing, I sent all that detailed information in a clear email, and then I went over to the Remind app and I said, all of the information about recitals is in your email. Please check your inbox and let me know if you have any questions. So that was a quick way to prompt people to read that information. Now, I also verbally do all of that information. I make sure with my students that I'm telling them everything, and if I see a parent in person, I will just say all the same things that I have said in the email, because parents are really busy, and I know as a busy parent myself, it's just very helpful to receive the same things over and over again as far as remembering them, but I don't want to overdo it on email because you really can clog people's inboxes, which they don't usually appreciate. So I will frequently, especially for the parents who I know need that extra little bit of help, I might see them out the window, see that they're waiting in the car, and just go out and say, hey, I just want to make sure you got all the information about the recital, all that kind of thing. So that's studio-wide communication. I do not send information about reminders for payments or invoices because, as you can see from my May 2022 Ask Me Anything, I do automatic payments on a tuition schedule. So if you want to know more about that, go back to that video, and that might help you. So all of my communication that's studio-wide is about calendar, performances, upcoming events, those kinds of things. As far as individual communication goes, I do require parents of my youngest students and beginners to attend at least for a couple of months so that they're very clear on how I teach, what my practice expectations are, and all those kinds of things. So for those parents of beginning students, I'm just going to communicate with them on a weekly basis in person in the studio. For older kids and more advanced students, you don't see those parents very frequently, especially if they're teenagers who drive themselves to their lessons. So if you need to send a quick reminder text about something to those parents that you don't see, I would frequently do that. If I have a student that I'm concerned about because they are just not seeming like themselves or something is not going well in their lessons, I will definitely pick up the phone and call. I had that happen a couple of months ago. I was concerned about a student, and I called the mom. We had a lovely chat. There were some things going on in their home life, and it was just really good to hear from the parent how she felt like her child was doing and just, have that communication about that. So it's not frequent. I might send a quick text to a family saying, hey, could you bring this book this week or something like that. And then I do studio progress reports individually for students really about once a year. It would be great if I did it twice, but in reality, it's happening about once a year. So that's an opportunity for me to say, here's what your child is doing well, the strengths that they're bringing to their lessons, and here's the areas that I'd like to see them grow in the future. And usually with, I would say about half the parents that I deal with, that prompts a nice little quick conversation. Thank you so much for sending this. We'll do our part to work on XYZ. Or maybe a question like, why should we work on that kind of thing? Those sorts of things. So hopefully that's a few thoughts on studio communication. If you want to talk more about communication with parents, particularly around specific examples or issues that you are dealing with, that would be a great topic for a teacher consultation. So feel free to check out my service on that as well. All right, question number 2 today. How much should piano students practice hands separately? The answer to this question entirely depends on the age of the student, the level of their repertoire, as well as what type of repertoire they are playing. So it's not something that I can just, blanket answer for you very quickly. But I will say that I think a lot of students, particularly intermediate students, default to practicing too much hands separately. I think that instead their learning process might go quicker if they would start hands together earlier in that process, or if they would learn different techniques for simplifying things during the learning process. So by that I mean things like blocking chords in one hand while you also play the other. That would be a way of simplifying during that learning process, not playing everything as it's written on the page, and yet still working on that hands together coordination and hearing all the harmony. Hand separate practice works really well for polyphonic music at the piano. The best example of this would of course be something like a Bach invention, where you want to practice both lines independently because you want to hear them solve fingering issues, really focus on the individual line, how you're going to articulate it, all those sorts of things. But I think in other types of music, there are other simplification tools that we have at our fingertips. So if you watch my How to Teach Intermediate Repertoire videos, I try to give several types of practice techniques in how to practice. And hopefully that gives you a few other things to do besides just default to weeks of hand separate practice, which I do not think is the best idea. Our last question today is a very special one. This video is publishing in July, but I'm actually taking a break from teaching in July. And so I asked my dear friend, Christina Whitlock, over at the Beyond Measure podcast, if she would write a guest post for my blog. And her post is written from the standpoint of a really great question. What are things that you didn't learn in pedagogy class? What's something you never learned in class, but you've learned through teaching? I thought this was a great question, so I'm using it as my last question today. So let me say the question again. What's one pedagogical principle that you never learned in pedagogy class? The truth of the matter is that there's never enough time in pedagogy class, and there's so much to learn that it's impossible to cover everything. And so much of teaching, because it's such a practical art, so much of what we do, we learn through experience. And so I would think my answer today for one thing that I've learned through the experience and not through class is that running a studio requires great leadership skills. Running your own independent music studio is really like being the CEO of a company. You work for yourself. You have to make all the decisions. And so I've been fascinated with the topic of leadership. This is also because my husband has a job where he is intensely in leadership all the time. And I found myself being really interested in books about leadership and in considering good leadership techniques and practices. I will put a couple of resources in the description of this video if this sounds interesting to you, but I would just like to frame this as some of us bring a real knack for leadership to the table when we are running a studio, and some of us, are not as naturally bent that way, and that's okay. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, and so over the past several years, I have found myself really reflecting on what are my strengths, particularly in the topic of leadership, that I'm bringing to the table. What am I already doing well? How can I continue to do that? And then what are the areas in which I could really stand to grow and be a better leader? And then my husband and I frequently have conversations about, particular issues and circumstances. How can I be a good leader right now given this set of circumstances? What would be the best way to honor the people around me, to lead, and to do a good job in this? So if you haven't thought of yourself as a leader, but you're running an independent studio, then I'd like you to reframe that and think about yourself as a leader. And maybe, just take some time to reflect on what you're already doing well from the standpoint of leading your studio and what you could improve on. And again, this is another topic. If you'd like to talk about it, I would love to talk about it in my teacher consultation service. And, it's just a path that we all need to continually be growing in and learning more about. I hope you found a couple of helpful things in today's Ask Me Anything answers. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button and share it with a colleague or friend who might also find it helpful. Please subscribe to my channel, check out all my other videos that I have available for you, and best wishes in all of your teaching.